Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's webinar with Amazon Web Services. Today, what Amazon want to do as one of our partners on the 944 framework is, discuss cloud services and cloud computing, and actually, what it offers you, whether you are in education, public sector. Amazon supplying fantastic solutions, fantastic pieces of software, and what we're trying to do is just reach out there to the public sector so that everybody has availability to Amazon Web Services to get those solutions in place. There's never been a time where we've needed to do this more. So what YPO want to do is be informative and work with Amazon on your behalf and be that conduit. So I'm going to pass over to Amazon now, and I'm really looking forward to this session myself. So please enjoy, and I think we're going to be looking at questions at the end. So thanks everybody for joining today.
Thank you, Zoe. Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Namrata. I work in Amazon Web Services education team in the UK. I'm part of a wider public sector team that's focused on helping public sector organizations leverage cloud and technology to deliver outstanding citizen services. So whether that be your NHS, local authorities, central government, universities, colleges, or even schools. My team focuses solely on education, and I work with schools and colleges, so there will be a slight bias in education in this webinar, but we will cover a number of different use cases from different organizations. I'm joined today by my colleague Kevin Long and Katie John, who will cover the financial implications of buying cloud and how do you actually procure it. So without further ado, let me jump into the agenda. As Zoe said, the session has been recorded and we will share resources and links at the end if you have more questions and if you want to dive deeper. Any questions, pop them into the chat and we will answer them at the end. I'm sure there'll be plenty of time that we'll keep. We've got a fair bit to cover from the session, but I want you to take away three things. First, why would you consider cloud? How can it benefit your organization? Second, how can you actually get started with cloud? And thirdly, what are the financial implications of moving to cloud and how do you procure it? What are the things that you need to be aware of? We are not financial advisors or accountants, so we can't share financial advice, but we can share best practice and tell you how other public sector organizations, commercial bodies, have managed their financial operations and procurement once they've moved to the cloud. Because let's be honest, it is very different, isn't it, to managing an on-prem environment. But again, we'll come on to that in more detail later. So I'd love to start with a quiz question. And so I'm going to do that again. How did Amazon.com, a retail company selling online books originally, get into cloud computing? If you think you know the answers, just give it a go, give it a guess, and type your answers into the chat. Unfortunately, I have no prizes to give away today, but I will give you a round of applause. So the answer is that most people know Amazon as a global retail company, and that is certainly where our roots are. But I'm here today to talk about Amazon Web Services, the technology business that we built to support our retail business, which is now developed into the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform. So let me take you back to 2006, when we started Amazon Web Services. It was started up by Andy Jassy, who is now CEO of Amazon.com. As we built the system to support our retail business, we found that we'd actually developed a core competency in building and operating highly resilient and scalable infrastructure to support our retail business. And we believed that other organizations, whether that be public sector, commercial bodies, or even startups, could benefit from that capability. We now call that cloud computing. We pioneered cloud long before it became mainstream. So I'll give you an example. When we started off Amazon.com, we realized that whenever we brought a new product online or we were trying a new service or an innovation, it would take weeks and months to get the infrastructure purchased, procured, set up, and that would really put us behind where we wanted to be in terms of growth. So we realized it's a problem that wasn't just facing Amazon.com, but any organization out there. So we then developed this core competency around running highly scalable infrastructure. What we did was we took away the heavy lifting of managing infrastructure and let businesses, public sector organizations focus on their core mission and business outcomes. We democratized cloud technologies and made it accessible for anyone to use, whether you're an individual developer, a startup, a massive bank, or a university or a school. I'll give you an example. It's a really recent one. There was the Cyber UK conference that happened in Wales just a couple of days ago, and I was listening to the keynote from the CIO of the Ministry of Justice, and she was talking about why they moved to cloud. A couple of years ago, the Ministry of Justice, their infrastructure basically failed. They were in the news. What that meant is that our court system completely shut down. That kind of spurred them on to start their journey in the cloud. And the reason I give you this example around democratization of technology is because the same technology that the Ministry of Justice uses, for example, to protect the data of the most vulnerable people in society is actually available to everyone to use through a simple console in AWS. Right, moving on. I'm gonna go back to basics and say, what does cloud actually mean? It can mean different things to different people depending on who you speak to. At Amazon, we define cloud computing really simply. For us, it is the on-demand delivery of IT resources and applications via the internet with pay-as-you-go pricing. Pay-as-you-go pricing is one model of buying cloud, and there sometimes can be a bit of worry around it in public sector. Am I going to run up a massive bill? But there are other models too when you look at buying cloud and how you can replicate those models that you currently use when you buy infrastructure through lump sum payments. So I just want to kind of take away a common misconception that you can only buy cloud through pay-as-you-go. And Kevin is going to come on to his section later on to talk about the different models that you can use to buy cloud. Essentially, instead of buying, owning, and maintaining data centers and servers, you can acquire the technology like compute, storage, databases, machine learning, AI, you name it. You use it, you scale it up or scale it down, depending on what demand is like, or simply just switch it off when it's not in use. I want you to think about the switching off or consuming what you need and the impact that can have on your sustainability goals. So I'll come on to sustainability a bit later on, and Kevin's going to cover it as well. It's similar to how you flip on a switch at home. You turn on the lights and use electricity, and the power company just sends you a bill for what you've actually consumed. So cloud is the new normal, especially post-COVID. Organizations, regardless of their size or which sector they work in, are now having conversations of not if or why, but when and how. You probably all know what a traditional infrastructure looks like. You've got servers, routers, equipment that you must provision, manage, and secure. Heat it, cool it, and make sure that it's in a safe area. In the traditional model, you will pay for everything up front, nothing is on demand, and sometimes there can be significant long contracts that you get tied into. You've got to go through a pretty long planning process. You've got to determine what you need, buy it, set it up, and then hope that you've got planned correctly for demand in the future. A lot of administration that goes into it, right? But with cloud computing, you simply turn things on as you need them, use them, and then turn it off when you're no longer using them. So instead of spending a lot of time planning, seeking funding, you just focus on building. You build applications, services to meet the requirements of your users or the core mission of your business. Sorry, I think I've flicked ahead, haven't I? There's just one final thing I wanted to kind of to bring this to life is give you an example. So imagine Netflix or Airbnb or Uber. If they had to spend millions on just buying servers and set up infrastructure and data centers ready for when their business scaled, the reality is they wouldn't have existed as businesses today, would they? Instead, what they did was they leveraged cloud to build from a very small user base, and then they were able to scale massively when their applications took off to become the world's most popular, most used applications in the cloud. Right. I did say that I work in education, so there will be a slight bias, but I will give you lots of other examples as well. In the UK, we work with schools, colleges, Russell Group universities, and large edtech companies. Several thousands of schools already use Amazon Web Services through edtech companies like Wand, Satchel, Arbor, ScholarPack, CDSM, amongst others. A great example is Wand. They are a data integration, an API integration education technology company. They're used by over 24,000 schools, and they have 10 million children that are using their services. They've used AWS quite recently and the cloud to deliver free school meal vouchers to several thousands of school children and families across the UK. So a great example of how they've used technology and cloud to deliver a really essential service to families across the UK. Right, I'm going to talk about another example from the University College London, which is UCL, and their virtual learning platform. Like all colleges, universities, or schools, the virtual learning platform is very much the center of their digital education infrastructure and is used by students, whether it's for remote learning or learning at school, college, or even blended learning. Before migrating to the cloud and Amazon, at UCL, I think their system could handle just about 2,500 concurrent users. But when the pandemic hit, everybody went online, and the UCL team wanted to scale their Moodle environment to support at least 6 times more than what they currently did. To achieve this, the university migrated Moodle to AWS. They did this in, I think, just 10 weeks. It was a pretty tight timescale because they wanted to be ready for autumn 2020. Since their migration, just to give you an idea of the impact that it's had across teaching and learning, they can now dynamically scale up. They can support any number of concurrent users. They're no longer limited. So they're supporting about 14,000 staff, 43,000 students, and 150 countries across the world. They generate about 10,000 transactions per minute during peak periods. And after completing the migration, they've seen a huge impact on the performance. So again, just to give you an idea of what that actually means, is that when they were running in an on-prem environment, what once took about 15 seconds at max capacity can now be done in just 350 milliseconds when they're running in the cloud. Right. So staying with education, if you look at education, and again, this applies to any organization where they see lots of peaks and troughs actually. So it's not solely education, but I'll give you the education example. So in education, you know, the demands on technology can be quite seasonal and it's periodic, isn't it? So if you consider student registration, exams, enrollment, results day, etc., there are periods of the academic year when you know when you can anticipate your IT needs. With traditional IT, it's a fixed cost model. It's the orange line that you see on the top, and institutions will often overpay for what they actually use because they'll over provision for peak demand. But with the cloud model, you're much closer to the bluer curve, and your costs will sort of vary up and down depending on the load on your system. And it will always usually be less than what you would have bought ahead of time, trying to kind of forecast demand if you were to buy infrastructure. So AWS or cloud will allow you to invest only in the capacity that you need. You use it when you need it, and when you don't need it, you simply just turn it off. It's quite easy to accurately identify your cloud usage and costs up front. And again, Kevin's going to come on to this very shortly. And as I said, this graph or this model doesn't just apply to education. It could apply to any organization where demand is not static, but fluctuates over periods of time. Right, so some of the benefits. The most obvious benefit of moving to cloud is cost savings or total cost of ownership, which is traditionally related to infrastructure savings. Paying for what you use, etc., will automatically have an impact on saving money over a period of time. But the second thing is around staff productivity and efficiency. So you're reducing the burden on your staff of doing all of that infrastructure heavy lifting of batching and managing servers and data centers. So they can go away and focus on what really matters for your business outcomes or for your users. The third is around resilience and improved quality of service and better operational SLAs. Organizations that use AWS Cloud have had over 50% less downtime. And talking from an education perspective, that's really crucial because you can't afford to have any downtime, can you? But again, any industry, any organization where you can't really afford to have downtime for your users. The final one is agility. And increased velocity for innovation and bringing new ideas and solutions to market quickly. Speed and agility most definitely matter. So again, I'll give you an example. It's from pharma company Moderna. So during the pandemic, speed to market really mattered, and Moderna was able to complete the sequence of their COVID-19 vaccine in just 2 days using machine learning built on AWS. The first clinical batch was released just 25 days later from that date. They used machine learning, artificial algorithms to enable drug development and went through very rapid experimentation cycles to help design this mRNA or messenger DNA sequences and they also use the same technology for automation of quality control. And they were able to save hours and hours rather than trying to do this manually. And their clinicians, their research and scientists all worked in the cloud at a time when most of the world was in lockdown. So this is a great example of how cloud can enable agility and speed to innovation. I've got to talk about security because security is job zero at AWS. It is our responsibility to obtain the correct and the appropriate security and compliance certifications for our customers. We have by far the highest number of certifications in comparison to any other cloud provider. They're all third-party reports and compliance evaluations, and they can be accessed online via our artifacts portal. So what security is important, and I'll give you the example of Monzo Bank. It's a great example of where they've used cloud and AWS to improve their security posture. We all know that the financial services industry is highly regulated, and Monzo went from just an idea and a startup to a fully regulated bank in AWS Cloud. Monzo has handled over, I think, $1 billion worth of transactions for over 500,000 customers. And they've just got about 8 people managing their infrastructure in AWS. So again, that's testament to the fact of how much we've taken away the heavy lifting of infrastructure away from Monzo so they can innovate on behalf of their customers. And one of the initial reasons why Monzo chose AWS was actually the need around compliance and banking regulations and some of the fears that regulators had around security. And they use a number of different services in the cloud that enable security analysis, resource change tracking, compliance, auditing, etc. They're also able to segregate parts of their infrastructure into different accounts in AWS. So, for example, if one account in their infrastructure got compromised for some reason, critical parts of their infrastructure and other accounts remain unaffected. So it's given them the flexibility to architect really flexibly for security and to deliver a service with no downtime. So some of the common places that we've seen our customers start when they're thinking about cloud, I think there's most definitely is around remote learning or remote work, because we've seen a massive shift in the way people work post-pandemic. We've looked at, in public sector organizations, modernization of legacy infrastructure and cost optimizing once they've moved to the cloud to save money. We've looked at communications. That could be websites, call centers, setting up call centers really quickly, for example, during COVID. Business continuity and disaster recovery, another very obvious place to start in the cloud. We're also seeing a lot of work that's happening around data analytics, predictive data analytics, the ability to surface data in dashboards, etc. So yeah, these are just some common examples, but there are some very specific use cases depending on whether it's public sector or commercial, or what you're trying to achieve really. So I'd encourage you to have a conversation with us if you've got a specific problem you're trying to solve. So we've talked about the benefits of cloud, and these are just some of the common questions that come up quite early on when you're thinking about starting on a cloud journey or getting started on the cloud. So for example, do you really need a business case for cloud? How do you create a really compelling business case to justify moving to the cloud? How do you understand, what you have, across your estate in terms of applications? What's your environment? What does that discovery phase look like? What do you do? What do you actually move to AWS or any cloud provider? What makes sense? Does it make sense to just lift and shift? Should you re-platform? Should you refactor? Ultimately, do you have the skills to migrate and operate in cloud? And these questions are as much about people, processes, and culture as they are around technology. At AWS, we've taken our experience since 2006 and our maturity in helping large enterprise organizations migrate and modernize in the cloud. And we've got a number of different programs that we can work through to make the migration in a systematic and programmatic way if you're looking at a migration to the cloud. So I think the migration discussion, I think, is a really nice segue into Kevin's section of the webinar, where he'll be talking about a really exciting topic, which is cloud economics and what the financial implications are, and how do you manage your financial operations in the cloud. Kevin, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you, Namrata, and thank you everyone for taking the time today to attend this. Can I just check you can hear me okay before I carry on?
I can hear you.
Okay, excellent.
Okay.
And you can see my screen okay, yeah?
I can, yes.
Okay, super. So given what Namrata has described, I'm going to pick up on some of those themes and go into a little bit more detail. I'm part of the cloud economics function in AWS, and we're here because people who are looking to see what they can use cloud for often have questions around the economics, the costs of using cloud, and concerns. And I'm going to touch on some of those concerns and also talk about the principles behind how things are priced and how you can get value, how you can reduce costs through use of cloud. I have what I describe as being one of the best jobs in AWS because I spend a lot of my time talking to customers using AWS saying, stop spending money. Reduce how much you're spending by changing the way that you use cloud. And I'm going to touch on some of those things as I talk now. Now, the other thing that I spend a lot of time doing, as Namrata just described, is helping to develop business cases, guiding organizations on their own business case. It's something that they typically put together themselves, but I give guidance. And I'm going to use to start with a variant of the slide that Namrata showed earlier to explain the economics of cloud, but also how organizations can quantify the kind of benefits that they would get from moving. And so, as Namrata pointed out earlier on, usage changes over time. And in this case, I've got a very simple example where we predict what demand will be on the sloping dotted line. And then organizations have the challenge of working out how much capacity on an on-premise infrastructure they're going to need. And that's the blue horizontal line. And over time, they have to try and work out when their increased capacity, their increased demand means that they need to increase capacity. And this is a very simple, back to basics economics problem. How do I match supply and demand, particularly when, and we've been through this so much in recent years, we don't know what the demand is going to be. And as Namrata describes, what happens is we end up over provisioning capacity on premise, hoping that we keep up with the supply. So in this case, the demand is the red curvy line, and in this case, it's going up. It fluctuates, but over time, it's going up more than it's going down. And what we want to try and avoid is a situation where the red line crosses the blue line, because that means that in the first instance where it just touches, we get reduced performance. We get a bit of sluggish performance on our applications. But then later on in the time horizon, we see that it cuts right through and we probably get an outage. We probably get people unable to log on to systems in basic terms. Both those are bad things. What we want to try and do is avoid the two challenges we've got here. So that green dotted line is where we've got an excess of capacity. We're paying for the gap between the red line and the blue line, and we're paying in terms of the compute equipment we've bought, the storage equipment we've bought, the space that occupies, the energy it takes to power it and to cool it, the software that's on it, the people to manage it. There's a whole bunch of costs there that are not doing anything. They're not adding any value. The value they're adding, what we're trying to avoid is that red triangle where we get lost opportunity. We're not able to fulfill the requirements of our users. And so we want to try and balance those off. So what cloud does is tries to minimize overcapacity, and it tries to make sure there's enough capacity there all the time. There's some other things, and I'll come on to those later on. But what we're trying to do is match those two curves up, to scale up when we need to and scale back down when we don't want to. Now, when I show this, many people have an alarm bell ringing because they think about the variability of cloud and they think that's a concern. And they think, how do I stop my graph doing what this is and just going straight up? And we have many ways, many techniques to limit what happens so that you are limiting your spend and you are having control over things. I spoke to a university's research institute last week about this very matter and explains the controls they can put in place to stop researchers from spending beyond their budget effectively. So some simple controls that alert them and then their supervisors to when they're getting beyond their forecast. So they're still within budget, but maybe forecasted to spend too much. And then over time, it gradually reins in what they can do, protecting their data so that the research isn't impacted, but maybe limited what they can actually do until they resolve their budget deficit. So many ways that we can control that. And as I say, I'll come on to that in a moment. So the economics of cloud are around matching supply and demand, and there's a number of things you can do. Now, I've worked in technology for several decades now, and many technology companies work on the principle of they try and sell you as much as possible and rely on lever number 3. The customer then has to negotiate what the discount will be from the supplier. And that's a very old school approach. And one thing that Amazon as a company does, it's try to not be old school and be more customer centric. So we push way back to the left-hand side here with number 1 first and talk about educating customers about how they can be much more savvy and much more focused on only paying for what they use and only provisioning what they need. And that can be a variety of different things. So for example, if you've got systems, as we talked about earlier, that don't need to be running all the time, maybe they're seasonal exam systems, maybe they're just things that only are needed during term times or during the working week, they can be shut down. They can be shut down out of hours at seasonal times. And when they shut down, you stop paying for them. So AWS now has per second billing for many of our resources. The second you stop paying for it. And so getting those kind of usage right, number 1, is really crucial to making sure that you are only paying for the resources you need. The other big elements, or a couple of other big elements in that strand number 1, is the fact that we keep innovating. We keep bringing out new generations of compute, of storage, and each generation is faster, more performant, and cheaper from a cost performance perspective. And the variability of cloud allows you to switch as we produce new generations to switch to the latest one. So for example, on our storage platform, we have attached storage for compute environments. The latest generation is 20% cheaper. And one of the easiest jobs I get is pointing out to customers and saying, you're still using some of the older generation. Move it to the new, you'll save 20% on your storage costs. And inevitably, those are great conversations to have. So making sure that you think about what you use and what we call the right tool for the right job. And that's, we can keep providing new capabilities that allow you to have the right tool for the right job. So that's some of what we talk about in number 1. And I could spend half an hour just on that topic because there are so many great levers that we can apply in AWS. Once you've got consistency, you can then reserve, you can make a commitment. I'm going to touch on this in a bit more depth in a moment, and take out what we call a reservation. And that's typically, say, for a 1 year period, to say, okay, our core applications we're going to stay with for a year, we're going to take out some reservations, and that will save us up to about 72% is the kind of the ceiling on that. Paying for what you use can save up to about 80% of what you typically would pay for on-premise. Layer on top of that, paying when you reserve, getting up to another 70%, you can see how the cost savings accumulate. Before we get to kind of blanket agreements, and we'll touch on those a bit later on, in terms of using more and getting a kind of a more of a volume-based approach, we'll give additional discounts. So it's this layered approach to consider when thinking about the economics of cloud. Now, that's great in terms of some economics principles, but many of you will be thinking about your users and the applications that they use. And if we roll back to what Namrata was talking about, underneath that, we have some common components. We have servers, we have storage, we have database. And in most cases, when I look at bills that people provide, people of what they're using, those are the three common things they're using. Now, in AWS terms, we'll put all kinds of labels on them because we have many different services, but we're still providing the same things as you would get through traditional technology. Server, storage, and database being the core things, and those support your applications and users. So as Namrata talked about earlier on, as we think about the journey to cloud, we think about those applications and the best route for them. Are they something which can just be re-platformed into the cloud? Is it something which may need a bit more modification? Is it something actually that you would move away from and replace with something else because it's time to do that? So we always refer back when we think about a business case to what are you running, how are you using it, and what's the best way to take it on that journey? Now, we have in AWS plenty of scary slides like this that list all the 200 and something services, and it seems a bit overwhelming. And when I talk about costs and where people spend money, I try and damp down that concern and say those 4 areas, and 3 of them I've just talked about, storage, compute, and database, the non-add-on analytics, those 4 things typically are about 80% of what people actually spend their money on. The rest are fantastic services and they're really value adding, but the ones that actually cost money from an overall bill perspective are those 4. And as a finance person, I always focus on the big numbers. If I look at where people are spending most money and say, how can we attack those? How can we reduce what you're spending on those? Everyone tends to be happy because it's the Pareto. Spend 80% of your time, spend 20% of the time where 80% of the cost is, and you have most impact. And this is typically what those bills look like. This is an illustration, but it's an example of a bill. And if we look at those 4 segments of compute, the orange, storage, the light blue, database, the darker blue, and analytics, they come to over 3/4 of the pie. In fact, they're close to 80%. And so I always focus on those elements first. And by doing that, and this is as much in advance when the organizations are looking at considering cloud, but as I say, organizations that are spending money as well. And I have probably 2 or 3 of these conversations with customers each week, and every conversation without fail, I can say these are continued ways to save money. And often it's because of the innovation that we bring, new ways of doing things and new approaches. I'm going to touch on how we do this in real life. So we've talked about the variability of your usage. Imagine this is any 24-hour period, or it could be that this is months of the year. The same principle applies. Your usage will go up and down. For some applications, there will be a baseline of usage that you know will exist all the time. And that's where that commitment-based reservation comes in. If you know that you're going to use an application for a period of time, say for a year, and you're going to use it at a consistent level, that's where savings plans come in. And that lowest level, we have what we call instant savings plans. You're being very specific about the kind of servers. Now that's great, but things change. So you may then want to put on top of that a bit more variability. So we have another kind of savings plan called a compute savings plan that means whatever compute you use will give you a discount on it. And then on top of that, your spiky usage, that's where you pay on demand. And that's where every time it spikes up a bit, you pay per second. When the spikes drop down, you stop paying. And as I've said before, there are ways, and I'm going to talk about some of the process techniques, there are ways to have that orange dotted line. What's the limit that I want to put on to make sure that I don't spend beyond my budget? And in fact, I'm just going to flip back. I often have conversations with people who say, okay, I get that cloud is cheaper. I get that it's variable. How do I know I'm not overspending on any of these elements? So I did some work recently. We do quite a lot in AWS for the United Nations. And I talked with one of the United Nations agencies recently about how they could be certain about pretty much all of the components on this chart and the limit and the controls that we have in place, given how advanced our technology is now, to be able to control spend on all of these elements. And they found that really insightful as a conversation to give them that comfort about the spend. Part of the way to do that is what we call cloud financial management. And FinOps is a hot term which pretty much covers the same kind of thing. I'm not going to drill into the pillars here. We've got a great white paper which we can share with you afterwards if this is of interest, but I'm just going to touch briefly on these 4 steps: see, save, plan, and run. It sounds fairly straightforward, and like many things, we try and simplify in cloud. So start at a basic level and then dig deeper. So see is about saying, can we actually tag the resources? So those servers, storage, and database, can we tag them based on the application that's being that's using them, and maybe the department or the function or whatever? But being able to tag allows us then to measure and identify accountability. So which department is spending which proportion of our bill, and how is that changing over time? Now that sounds very straightforward. We can put things in place, but a lot of this is organizational. How do you want to define your departments? How do you define your applications? How do you define your users? And then you have a tagging strategy to say, every time something new is created, it has to have a tag, and these are the only tags you can use. If you do that, you have a way of controlling your cost. Once you can measure and make people accountable, you can then think about optimization. You can then think about some of the levers that I talked about in terms of reducing that spend. Once you get a better handle on optimization, you can then plan better. You become much, much more accurate at forecasting. Now, I can pretty much guarantee when we do business cases, cost savings tend to be in the 40 to 60% saving. So I can tell you from the outset that you will save money by moving workloads across, but then there's many opportunities to improve. The Home Office in the UK has written a blog post on how they reduced their in-cloud spend by over 40% by continuing to improve. The other thing is that improvement shouldn't be what I call a cottage industry. You shouldn't have to have hundreds of people helping you to save money. It should be part of your operational processes. And that's where that 4th column comes in, the run side of being able to manage your resources effectively and make improvements an incremental part of business. So what we call a cost-aware culture in the organization. And if you are developing your own applications, it becomes a different aspect because your developers need to be cost aware. If you're buying third-party or using third-party applications, then you can think about it in those terms when you look at new suppliers. Now, we've already seen this slide, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but I'm going to use this as a lead in because traditionally we talked about these 4 pillars all the time, and this is a great framework. What we've added on in recent times has become crucially important is the sustainability side. So whilst we've got great ways that we can add value to the organization, not only our economy of scale that we bring from the data center in cost terms is important, but the economy of scale that we bring in terms of carbon efficiency. So the server utilization that we have in our infrastructure, the energy efficiency of the servers that we design and build, and also the massive amount of renewable energy and the policy that Amazon has of pursuing renewable energy means that ultimately it's that top right-hand number that makes a difference. On average, delivering 72% carbon footprint reduction. So typically now when I produce a business case, customers will say to me, can you also estimate how much carbon footprint reduction we will get on moving our specific infrastructure from where it is today into the cloud? And that's the kind of area that we're involved in now. So that's a fairly rapid run through. I could talk for several hours on this and have a real passion because organizations can save a huge amount of money on doing this. But for today, I'm going to leave it at that and hand back over to Katie, in fact, next to pick up.
Katie, can you, we can't hear you yet. Katie, we can see you, but we can't hear you, right?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to say a brief word about procuring AWS Cloud. As Zoe said in the intro, we are on one of the YPO frameworks, which is obviously a nice kind of easy route to procurement for AWS. So we're on 4 lots of the data centers maintenance and cloud hosting framework. We're on lot 4 for audit and consultancy. We're on lot 5 for cloud and cloud services and hosting. And we're on lot 9 for education services. And we're able to offer pretty much the full broad range of AWS services through the YPO framework. So all of those services that Kevin talked about just then on that slide in terms of compute, storage, all of those kind of things can be bought via YPO. And in terms of the process for that, it's a further competition process, but there are templates there that are kind of ready-made that you can use to specify what it is that you want to buy and then to buy through it. And Zoe and the team are on hand to provide practical support around that. But actually, prior to that, you can come and talk to us directly about what it is that you're thinking about buying, and we can guide you towards the right service and provide some of the support around some of the areas that Namrata and Kevin have talked about in relation to understanding what cloud means for your organisation, the financials, the operational impacts. But then obviously, once you're at the stage of thinking that you'd like to procure, the YPO framework is there and ready to use. And the other thing I would just add to that is that a number of our partners are also on the YPO framework. So some customers buy AWS directly and others buy through our partners. And that's for a variety of reasons. But one in particular would be if an organisation wants a bit more hand-holding with setting up cloud or implementing a new cloud environment. Our partners have a very wide range of capabilities in that regard. So they're an additional route to market via YPO. That's that from me.
Kevin, are you still controlling the slides? Are you okay to move it on and rather than me? Thank you, Kevin. So we've we promised we'll finish in about 45 minutes or so. So I've got a couple of more minutes to go through. We've talked a lot about how do you get started, the common places you could start with, some of the financial operation elements that you need to consider, as Kevin said. But what if you just want to experiment? What if you just want to see what it's like to operate in an AWS environment? We've got a Cloud Fast Start program, which we deliver through one of our partners. It's a proof of concept service. So for example, you might want to set up an AWS account, trial some of the services, we'll put the credits in, we'll set it all up for you with the right security controls in place. You set it up, you trial it for 30 days. If it's not for you, then you simply turn it off. There's no cost commitment for your organization at all. Some of the common things that we've seen our customers do through a proof of concept might be that you've got maybe a website that's running on WordPress and you want to improve its security by moving it into AWS Cloud. You might want to move a physical tape drive, for example, into the cloud and move backup into the cloud, which is such an easy win, isn't it? Or you might just want to store data, or it might be some archival data that you want to store cheaply in the cloud. So we work with a partner if this is something you're interested in. So by all means, do reach out to me. I'll sort of share my contact details in the next slide. The other area that I did want to touch on is training and certification. So as I've said before, moving to the cloud or running your environment in the cloud is much about your culture, the training and the skills as much as it is about the technology involved. We've got a number of training resources, right from self-paced learning online all the way to classroom-based learning. If you're looking at potentially a complex migration. So again, I'll share resources after this webinar of all the free training that we've got coming on in the next couple of weeks and months, and there is a wealth of resources. And the training is not just for technical people. It's just worth mentioning. So you might be a business professional, you might be working in finance, and you want to understand, what it is to sort of operate in the cloud. We've got specific pathways depending on what your job role is in the organization. So I will follow up with links where you can join up for training, and obviously there are pathways to get certified on AWS as well. Kevin, do you want to move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I work in the education team, but I can put you in contact with the much bigger public sector team that sits behind us. For example, if you're looking at cloud economics, we've got Kevin's team. If you're looking at a very technical question, we've got solution architects. But I'll share my contact details to start off with, and then I can point you in the right direction if you've got any specific questions. I think that was pretty much it. So I think I've done well on time. I'd said 45 minutes and we had dotted 12:15. I'm very proud of myself.
Yeah, you've done great. Thank you. So
right.
Are you wanting to open up to any questions now?
Yeah. I can't see any questions here, but which is fine, which is why I've sort of shared my contact details. There might be questions that come up later on. Happy to take them on email, or if anyone wants to go via you, that's fine as well, Zoe, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we might be able to give people some time back on Friday afternoon.
Yeah, thanks ever so much, everybody, for joining in and taking the time out to join Amazon. Thanks very much to Amazon Web Services for doing this for part of YPO. We're really passionate about working with the public sector. We're a non-for-profit, and that's exactly what we do. With that conduit between the public sector and the suppliers, just to get these services. And I feel really passionate about education, that they have this opportunity as well. So it's great that we've touched on that and given examples. Storage, security, cost savings in the public sector is great. So we're really, really happy and proud to be working with you. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you, Zoe. I will follow up with, as I promised, Kevin's got a white paper around cloud economics, which I'll share, and other links to resources that anyone who wants to dive deep can go into at their own time.
Yeah, just for anybody that's listening, this session has been pre-recorded. So if you wanted to share that with your colleagues or any other schools, universities, colleges that you think that might be helpful for, we can actually provide that and give you access to the team as well. So thanks everybody for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you.